Early on a frigid morning last week, I went to the beach to surf, and the conditions looked absolutely terrible. There was no one there except for three of the coolest looking surfers I have ever encountered. They were in their 20s with shoulder-length hair, wearing wetsuits, but no booties or rubber hats or leashes, and the boards they carried were artistic and beautiful and sweet and perfect. They had style. Walking over, I asked them, I said, "How was it out there in the ocean?" And one replied, "There is fun to be had." And I simply couldn't believe the guy. The tide was too high, the winds were blowing too strongly and from the wrong direction. It seemed obvious, but because of that one sentence, I walked a mile all the way down to the northern end of the cove, and I paddled out into the cold water. Now, you couldn't see it from the parking lot, but the rugged cliffs were refracting all the energy of the bay into hollow, steep waves, breaking about 20 yards off the rocks. And I used all that I've ever learned over a whole lifetime to position myself at the peak, make the steep drop, and turn into those waves. And I felt so blessed to still have the strength and fitness to be able to do this. If only I could convey to you that feeling of pumping down the face along that green wall that was so smooth, it felt like you could write your name on it. The only problem was that those waves never stopped or closed out. It seemed like one moment you were in the middle of the bay, and the next you were being ground into hamburger meat over the rocks and gravel on the beach. In short, you had to know to kick out early. Today, we gather for a solemn and joyful occasion, the installation of Louise Gregory and Rebecca Nessel as cathedral canons. And to you both, I have a simple message so that you never forget it. At Grace Cathedral, there is fun to be had. Every year, I learn so much more about what a cathedral is, about this institution's history, its unique contribution to society. And every year, the leaders of this cathedral ask the same question. If you had a Gothic cathedral in the heart of Silicon Valley, what would you do with it? Well, Louise and Rebecca are going to help us find this out. 1,000 years ago in England, there were 9 secular cathedrals and 10 monastic ones, as well as 4 other secular cathedrals in Wales. The monastic cathedrals were run by monks. The secular cathedrals, which were sometimes called minsters, like York Minster or Westminster, were ones that were administered by secular priests, some of whom in different eras were actually married, strangely enough. Because these secular priests were also under vows, that is, they followed a rule of life, they were called canons. So a canon is like a general rule, a law, a principle, a criterion. And that rule that governs our lives is called a canon, and the people who follow that rule are canons. Benedict's Rule was a book that was written in the year 530 AD in Latin, and it describes how monks should live together in community. Very simple directions, help us to figure out the ordinary pragmatic problems and deep spiritual ones. And often during cathedral administrative meetings, a chapter from it would be read. And that is how the group with responsibility for cathedrals came to be called a chapter, chapters. So today, there are 43 Church of England cathedrals following in this tradition, but there are also hundreds of cathedrals around the world. And on my last visit to Canterbury Cathedral, where our young men will be this next year in England, I had the most powerful spiritual moment, and it didn't happen in the cathedral at all. It was in the chapter room. To have a sense for hundreds of years of decisions being made that were like the ones that we make here in California, being made in that place, it was overwhelming to me. Now, I have heard that Grace Cathedral was one of the first cathedrals to ever have lay people as canons. And I think that Canon Michael Lampin's father may even have been our first lay canon. And I don't know if these things are true, but I do want to try to describe how our life is shaped by these ancient traditions. In our rule of life here at Grace Cathedral, canons have a great deal of authority, and not just in a narrow area of responsibility. When you work at Google or Cisco or City Hall, you may be an expert on communications, accounting, HR, facilities, etc., and you work in that area. But in our chapter, all of us have our areas of expertise, but also contribute to much bigger questions about every aspect of cathedral life. We are all part of decisions about having to do with everything from what concerts we offer, how to handle the budget, what changes we should make in the building, how we raise money, how we approach a social justice challenge. And I love the collegiality of our chapter. We trust each other. We feel a powerful sense of responsibility to follow through on what we commit to do. We are supportive of decisions that we make together, even when we as individuals had a different opinion of the course of action that we should have taken. Louise and Rebecca are part of this team. And tonight, before God, the cathedral community, and the world, we officially recognize their unique role in our enterprise. Now, Louise and Rebecca are so different in every respect. If you know them, you realize that. But one thing they definitely share is an amazing sense of style. Which I love. I mean, I would love to have just like this much of the style that each one of them has in their little finger. But first I want to talk a little bit about Louise. Louise joined us most recently in January of last year. And I don't know about my other colleagues, you guys can weigh in about this later on if you want, but Louise immediately swept me off my feet. I was just so charmed by her. She has the most wonderful personality. She has a great style, and just the way she goes through life is just so awesome. Louise has such a distinguished background in fundraising, too. And this means several things. First, she can talk in great depth about what she learned at the California Academy of Arts, at the Arts and Sciences, the Exploratorium, at UC Berkeley, and many other places. And when we face challenges, she has many sources to draw on for our comparison. It also means that she has experience with different processes and structures for organizing our work together. Now, recently, Louise came up with the idea of approaching a foundation that had long been disconnected from the cathedral. I thought it was a terrible idea, but I didn't tell her. Just let her I was like going to follow her lead. And she came up with this extraordinary plan for presenting a proposal. And now I think we're going to receive a gift of $2.5 million. And every time you raise this, you mention it to her, she's like, oh, it's a team effort, and you did a great job, and the whatever. But honestly, it would never have happened if it weren't for her, and for her vision, and for her creativity, and for her ability to follow up. As she learns more about the cathedral, it's so fun to hear her questions and how she assimilates everything, and her enthusiasm is infectious. Every one of us on the staff knows that Louise puts the fun in fundraising. Now, Rebecca Nessel first came to the cathedral in 2004 from the world of theater, and she is our producer and our director of artistic, cultural, civic events, the forums, and many, many other programs. She chooses and manages all those things, chooses the guests, chooses the artist in residence, presents us with different possibilities for artistic exhibits. She is extraordinary in writing anything. We were joking in a meeting earlier today where I needed summaries of sermons, and I looked at her and she's like, I can't write your sermons for you, Malcolm, but they would be so much better if you did. This week I told Rebecca that no one in the history of Grace Cathedral has been able to accomplish what she has done. She has raised the cathedral's profile to an international level. When I visit English cathedrals, National Cathedral, St. John the Divine, they are all aware of what we are doing here, and most often point to programs that Rebecca brought to us. Now, Rebecca's early education at Berkeley High and at Yale and through her whole life has prepared her for a very subtle and difficult job. And no one does this better. This ministry requires that you have an acute sense of judgment aesthetically. You can make great decisions about the quality of an artistic exhibit or plan. It requires an understanding of what's happening in society and an ability to predict how audiences are going to respond to the works that we put on. Now, I've got to level with you. The present company accepted. I mean, Jared, the musicians in this room, Chris, they're extraordinary to work with. But let me tell you, working with artists in general is not easy. But the artists love Rebecca. Every one of them tells me so. And her extraordinary interpersonal and organizational skills make things happen. She finds a way of taking impossible projects and following through so smoothly that they seemed inevitable. I just want to say this one thing this is the insider talk. Imagine a tree stump that has been made in bronze that weighs 10 million, 10 tons, and bringing it into the cathedral and showing it as an exhibit. Rebecca is one of the few people also who you will meet who has absolute personal integrity. She has made principled stands on matters even at her own significant expense. Rebecca is committed to the transformation of our society. She helps the cathedral to build a just world that supports the dignity of every person. And every week, I am inspired by the work that Rebecca does and by the work that Louise does. Now, it's customary on solemn occasions like this to offer one word of advice to the two of you. And you probably know that for me, serving at Grace Cathedral is the greatest joy of my life, that it is for me like surfing. Each day, the conditions and challenges are different, but it is always a beautiful activity that through God's grace we engage in. And working so closely with you is one of the greatest blessings of my life. But your work can be all-consuming. We have to be connected to something beyond the cathedral. The cathedral cannot become everything for us. Each of us needs to find a way out of each wave before it goes grinding over the rocks so that we can surf another wave. These are difficult times, my friends. And some might even say that these are the worst days to be a cathedral. But I don't think so. Louise and Rebecca, you are two of the coolest canons I have ever encountered. Thank you for making Grace Cathedral a sanctuary for people who are suffering, a light of possibility and hope, and a sign of God's love for all people. On behalf of my other sisters and brothers in chapter, Lori Coleman, Mary Carter Green, Jack Fagan, Eva Slavitt, Jared Johnson, Anna Rossi, and Burns Jones, we welcome you as canons of Grace Cathedral. There is fun to be had.